was busy perfecting the assembly line in America, Japan was just getting started. The first real breakthrough came in 1907, when an engineer named Komanasuke Uchiyama finished the Takuri, the first gasoline-powered car built entirely in Japan. Only about 10 were ever made, but it was a huge statement. Japan could do this. After that, fledgling companies started popping up. In 1911, Masujiro Hashimoto founded Koishinsha Motor Car Works. They would later produce the DAT car, a name cooked up from the initials of his key investors, Den, Aoyama, and Takeuchi. That little company was the seed that would, after a whole lot of mergers and changes, grow into the giant we know today as Nissan. But let's be honest, these early efforts were just drops in the ocean. In the 1920s and 30s, the Japanese auto market was completely dominated by America. Ford set up a factory in Yokohama in 1925, and GM followed in Osaka in 1927. Between them, these American titans pumped out over 200,000 vehicles in Japan before 1936. In that same time, all of Japan's domestic carmakers combined made just over 12,000. They weren't just outnumbered, they were outmatched. They were students learning by copying. The 1917 Mitsubishi Model A, often called Japan's first series production car, was patterned after a Fiat. Others, like Isuzu, made deals to build European cars like the Wolseley and the Austin. It was a necessary phase of imitation and education. The real push for growth, though, didn't come from passenger cars. It came from the looming shadow of war. As the 1930s marched on, the Japanese military's need for trucks skyrocketed. The government, realizing how important a domestic auto industry was for its military, passed the Automobile Manufacturing Industry Law in 1936. This law effectively kicked their foreign competitors out of the country by 1939. Companies like Toyota, which started out making textile looms, were pushed to start building vehicles. Nissan, Isuzu, and Toyota all began churning out trucks for the Imperial Japanese Army. It was during this time that one of the first major Japanese innovations appeared. The Kurigane Type 95, often considered the world's first mass-produced four-wheel drive passenger car, built specifically for military use. But all this growth was focused on war. The passenger car was still a unicorn, a luxury for the very, very few. By the time World War II erupted, the Japanese auto industry was still a toddler, a small, insulated enterprise serving the military. It had learned how to build, but it hadn't yet learned how to compete. That lesson would come after a period of unimaginable destruction. Chapter 2. Rising from the Ashes, 1945-1960s. The underdog's first steps. The end of World War II left Japan utterly devastated. Its cities were flattened. Its economy was in ruins. Its industrial base shattered. The auto industry was no exception. Production was severely restricted by the Allied occupation, limited almost exclusively to the trucks needed for reconstruction. Companies like Toyota were on the verge of collapse. What saved them? A lifeline from the most unexpected place. Contracts to repair and build vehicles for the American military during the Korean War. It was an injection of cash and experience that kept the fragile industry from blinking out of existence. As the Japanese economy slowly creaked back to life, a new problem arose. The average person needed a way to get around, but a full-sized car was an impossible dream. The solution was quintessentially Japanese. Small, efficient, and brilliantly practical. This was the birth of the K-car. The government created a new vehicle class with strict limits on size and engine displacement, initially capped at a tiny 150 cubic centimeters for four-stroke engines, or 100 cubic centimeters for two-strokes. The rules would later change, but the philosophy was set. In exchange for being tiny, these cars got huge tax and insurance breaks, making them affordable for the masses. This wasn't just about building cheap cars. It was a policy that shaped the nation's entire engineering mindset. It forced designers to become masters of maximizing space, minimizing weight, and sipping fuel. The result was cars like the 1958 Subaru 360, nicknamed the Ladybug. It was a tiny, rear-engine marvel that could technically seat 4 adults, though they'd have to be very good friends. It was cheap to buy, cheap to run, and perfect for Japan's narrow streets. It was a massive hit and, like the VW Beetle in Germany, it put a whole nation on wheels. The K-car boom taught Japanese manufacturers how to build small, reliable, and economical cars, skills that would become priceless later on. By the mid-1950s, the industry's heavyweights were finding their feet. They'd moved on from just assembling foreign cars. Now, companies like Nissan and Isuzu were building their own versions of the Austins and Hillmans they used to get in a box. The training wheels were off. With a booming home market, they started to look outward. They started to dream of exporting. Their first attempt was, to put it gently, a complete disaster. In 1957, Toyota decided to enter the biggest, toughest car market in the world, the United States. They showed up with the Toyota Crown, and sales began in 1958. This was a car built for Japan's slow, paved city roads. On America's high-speed freeways, it was dangerously underpowered. It overheated, and its name, Toyopit, sounded more like a chew toy than a serious car. It was a total failure, and Toyota quietly pulled it from the passenger market to rethink its entire strategy. It was a humiliating but vital lesson. You couldn't just sell your home market car to the rest of the world. You had to understand the customer. You had to adapt. Nissan, learning from Toyota's faceplant, had better luck. They entered the US under the name Datsun, launching models like the Bluebird. These cars were still small and basic, but they were tough, reliable, and cheap. They didn't sell in huge numbers, but they found their niche. They were perfect second cars, or for college kids who needed something that just wouldn't die. While Detroit was building bigger, faster, thirstier land yachts every year, Datsun was quietly building something else. A reputation. A reputation for quality, for dependability, for a car that just worked. At the same time, a scrappy motorcycle company decided to try its hand at cars. In 1963, Honda, already a global powerhouse on two wheels, launched its first automobile, the T360K truck, followed quickly by the S500 sports car. By the end of the 60s, the Japanese auto industry was transformed. From the ashes of war, it had built a mighty domestic market on the back of the K-car. It had survived its first clumsy attempts at exporting and was now establishing a small but critical beachhead overseas. The underdog was on its feet, but no one, not even the most optimistic executive in Tokyo, could have predicted what was about to happen. An event that would cripple their global rivals and throw the doors to the world wide open. Chapter 3. The Turning Point, 1970s, a crisis of oil. An opportunity of a lifetime. The world changed on October 6, 1973. The Yom Kippur War began, and in response to Western support for Israel, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, declared an oil embargo. The price of oil basically quadrupled overnight. For the industrialized world, built on a foundation of cheap, endless oil, it was an economic earthquake. In America, the crisis created a defining image. Endless, snaking lines at gas stations, skyrocketing prices, and the sudden, terrifying realization that the age of cheap gas was over. For the American auto industry, this was a complete nightmare. Detroit's motto for decades had been "Bigger is better." Their showrooms were full of massive sedans and muscle cars with thirsty V8 engines. These cars were American culture on wheels, symbols of power and freedom. And overnight, they became dinosaurs. Nobody cared about horsepower anymore. They cared about miles per gallon. As American drivers desperately searched for a solution, they started noticing the handful of small, weird-looking cars that had been trickling in from that faraway island. Cars made by Datsun, Toyota, and a newer player, Honda. This was the moment Japanese automakers had been unknowingly preparing for their entire existence. Their whole history, from the government-mandated K-cars to their focus on small, efficient engines, had perfectly positioned them for this exact crisis. They didn't need to scramble to design small cars. They were already the masters of it. The Honda Civic, first introduced in 1972, was the perfect car at the perfect time. It was small, it was cheap, it was shockingly fun to drive, and it was incredibly fuel efficient. While Americans were lucky to get 12 miles per gallon from their V8 behemoths, the little Civic was getting 40. It was a revelation. Sales went through the roof. Honda, once a relative unknown, was suddenly a major player. Toyota and Datsun Nissan cashed in too. Cars like the Toyota Corolla and the Datsun B210 became bestsellers practically overnight. They offered everything the American consumer was suddenly desperate for: reliability, affordability, and fantastic fuel economy. And it wasn't just that they were efficient. They were also incredibly well-made. While American cars of the 70s were becoming infamous for shoddy quality and constant breakdowns, these Japanese imports just kept on running. A whole generation of buyers, burned by their domestic cars, tried a Japanese brand out of necessity and became customers for life because of the quality. Detroit's response was slow and clumsy. They tried to downsize their cars, but the results were often disasters. Models like the Ford Pinto and Chevy Vega were plagued by quality problems and safety recalls, cementing the idea that American automakers had lost their way. They had gotten lazy, even arrogant. And the Japanese automakers, with their relentless focus on quality and efficiency, were there to capitalize on every single mistake. The 1973 oil crisis was the single most important event in the history of the Japanese auto industry. It was the moment that turned them from a niche player into a global force. It wasn't just about selling cars. It was about changing minds. Before 1973, Japanese cars were seen as cheap, quirky alternatives. After 1973, they were the smart choice. They had earned a reputation for being the most reliable, efficient, and sensible cars on the planet. By the end of the decade, the numbers were staggering. Japan's car production had soared, and their share of the American market had exploded. They weren't the underdog anymore. They were a threat. The giants of America and Europe had been caught completely flat-footed, and the stage was set for an all-out war for global automotive domination. But Japan wasn't just going to compete on economy anymore. Flush with cash and confidence, they were about to unleash a technological revolution that would create the legends we still worship today. The Golden Age was about to begin. Chapter 4, The Golden Age, 1980s to 1990s, the Empire of Icons. If the 70s were about getting a foot in the door, the 80s and 90s were about kicking it off its hinges. This was Japan's bubble economy, a period of insane economic growth where it felt like the money would never stop. For the nation's automakers, already riding high, the possibilities seemed endless. They poured their fortunes into R&D, not just to build better economy cars, but to challenge the world's best in every category, including the most sacred of all, the high-performance sports car. This is when the legends were born. The poster cars. It was like an arms race of innovation, with each manufacturer trying to one-up the others with more power, more tech, and wilder designs. Nissan, already famous for its Z-cars, decided to revive a legendary name, the Skyline GTR. The R32 GTR that launched in 1989 wasn't just a car. It was a technological monster. It had a twin-turbo inline-six, the mythical RB26 DETT, and an advanced all-wheel drive system called a Tessa ETS. It was so dominant in touring car racing in Japan and Australia that it earned the nickname Godzilla, a monster from Japan that came to destroy the competition. In fact, it was so good in Australia that they changed the rules just to ban it, which is the ultimate badge of honor. Not to be outdone, Toyota was forging its own icons. The mid-engined MR2 proved they could build a world-class, affordable sports car. But their magnum opus was the fourth-generation Supra, the MKIV, launched in 1993. With its stunning design and the beastly 2JZ GTE twin-turbo engine, the Supra became a tuner's fantasy. That engine was so over-engineered from the factory it could handle absurd amounts of power, cementing its place in car folklore forever. And then there was Honda. Soichiro Honda's company was always about engineering. They decided to build a car that could fight Ferrari and Porsche, but with Japanese reliability. The result, launched in 1990, was the Honda NSX, a mid-engine supercar with an all-aluminum body, a high-revving V6 with VTEC, and handling that was fine-tuned by the legendary F1 driver Ayrton Senna. The NSX shattered the myth that supercars had to be fussy and unreliable. It was a surgical instrument you could drive every day. Mazda, always marching to its own beat, perfected its unique rotary engine. The third-gen RX-7, the FD, is still considered one of the most beautiful cars ever made. Its sequential twin-turbo rotary was a marvel, and its lightweight body and perfect 50-50 weight distribution made it one of the best-handling cars of the era. Amazingly, this performance explosion happened under a strange limitation. The Japanese automakers had a gentleman's agreement to limit the advertised power of their cars to 276 horsepower. In reality, everyone knew these engines made way more power right out of the factory. The agreement created this fun, open secret where the true potential of these machines was just waiting to be unlocked. This relentless drive for excellence wasn't just a business plan. It was a philosophy. It was the embodiment of Kaizen, the idea of continuous improvement. It's not about giant leaps, but about making small, constant improvements every day at every level. From the line worker figuring out a better way to install a bolt, to an engineer refining an engine design, the goal was unending perfection. This was Japan's secret weapon. It's why their cars were so reliable, why their factories were so efficient, and why they could innovate at such a breathtaking pace. Having conquered the mainstream and performance worlds, there was only one frontier left: luxury. In the late 80s, the Japanese giants aimed their guns at Mercedes-Benz and BMW. Honda went first, launching its Acura brand in 1986. But the real earthquake hit in 1989. Toyota, after years of secret development, unveiled the Lexus LS 400. It sent a shockwave through the entire luxury car world. It was faster, quieter, and more advanced than its German rivals, and it cost significantly less. The first Lexus ad famously showed a pyramid of champagne glasses stacked on the hood, not moving a millimeter while the engine revved, a stunning display of its smoothness. Nissan quickly followed with its own luxury brand, Infiniti. By the mid-90s, the conquest was complete. Japanese companies weren't just competing, they were leading. They built the best economy cars, the most exciting sports cars, and the most refined luxury sedans. They had created an automotive empire. But as the bubble economy burst and the 21st century dawned, a new set of challenges would force that empire to adapt all over again. Chapter 5. An Automotive Empire. 2000s today, the challenges of dominance. The new millennium found the Japanese auto industry at the absolute peak of its power. The wild golden age sports cars were fading from showrooms as the economy sobered up, but the foundation they'd built was rock solid. In 2000, Japan became the largest car-producing nation in the world. And in 2008, Toyota finally did it. It dethroned General Motors as the world's largest automaker, a title GM had held for 77 years. The underdog was now the king. The focus shifted from raw performance to a new battlefield: sustainability. And once again, Japan was ahead of the game. While others were still tinkering with gasoline, Toyota bet the farm on a radical new idea: the gasoline-electric hybrid. In 1997, they launched a strange-looking sedan in Japan called the Prius. The name, Latin for "to go before," was spot on. When the second-gen Prius went global in 2003, it became a cultural icon. It was the first truly mass-produced hybrid, and it perfectly captured the growing green consciousness of the 21st century. The Prius was more than a car. It was a statement. Its revolutionary hybrid system set the template for nearly every hybrid that came after it, cementing Japan's reputation as a leader in green tech. This era of dominance wasn't without its struggles. The 2008 financial crisis hit hard, and the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami caused massive disruptions to production. But through it all, the philosophy of Kaizen, of resilience and continuous improvement, saw them through. They streamlined production even more, built factories all over the world to spread the risk, and continued to top the sales charts thanks to their bulletproof reputation for quality and value. For millions of families, a Toyota or a Honda became the default, no-brainer choice. Today, however, the empire faces its biggest challenge yet. The ground is shifting again, this time toward fully electric vehicles. And in a strange twist of irony, the very pioneers of electrification with the hybrid are now seen as falling behind. While American, Chinese, and European carmakers are going all in on EVs, Many of Japan's biggest brands have been more cautious. They've continued to pour money into hybrids while also exploring other paths, like hydrogen fuel cells. There are reasons for this hesitation. A belief that there isn't just one solution to carbon neutrality, worries about battery supply chains and charging infrastructure, and the immense pressure to protect Japan's massive network of suppliers who are experts in combustion engines, not electric motors. The result? Japanese brands, once the undisputed kings of green tech, now account for a surprisingly tiny piece of the global EV pie. New challengers are rising, and for the first time in a long time, there's a real fear that Japan could get left behind in the biggest automotive shift since the car was invented. The government has set a target for all new cars sold in Japan to be environmentally friendly by 2035. But the road to get there is still fiercely debated. The story of the Japanese car industry is a cycle of disruption and adaptation. They were born from imitation, forged in the fires of post-war reconstruction, rose to power during a global crisis, and became legends through an obsessive pursuit of perfection. Now, they stand at another crossroads, facing a world that's rapidly moving away from the very technology they spent a century mastering. The question is no longer how they conquered the world, but how they'll defend their empire in an electric future. The history of Japanese cars is filled with so many incredible machines. From the humble Civic that changed the world to the godlike Skyline GTR. Every enthusiast has that one car, the one that started the obsession. What's your favorite JDM classic? The one that got you hooked? Let us know in the comments below. From the hand-built Takuri of 1907 to the Prius that sparked a global hybrid revolution, Japan's journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. They didn't just learn to build cars. They redefined what a car could be. They taught the world that efficiency didn't have to be boring, that performance could be reliable, and that quality wasn't a luxury, but a standard. Their success was built on resilience, a deep-seated culture of continuous improvement, and an uncanny knack for turning crisis into opportunity. The road ahead is uncertain, but if the last 100 years have taught us anything, it's this: never, ever underestimate the ambition and ingenuity of the Japanese auto industry.